There's a ditch on the side of a county road outside Detroit where dandelions, plantain, and yarrow grow in a tangled mass between cracked asphalt and rusted guardrails. Nobody stops. Nobody looks twice. But a Roman legion would have recognized that ditch as a field hospital. A Cherokee healer would have seen a pharmacy. And a modern pharmacologist, if they knelt down, would find compounds backed by clinical trials published in the last decade. Your grandparents knew these plants by name. Soldiers packed them in battlefield kits. And right now, peer-reviewed research is confirming what traditional medicine documented centuries ago. You've been mowing over medicine, spraying it with herbicide, calling it a weed. That stops today, because in the next 20 entries, you'll meet plants with 2,000 years of documented use, and one that's literally the ancestor of a drug in your medicine cabinet right now. You've probably pulled this one out of your lawn with your bare hands and thrown it away like garbage. Dandelion, the whole body reset, is one of the most aggressively removed plants in North America, and simultaneously one of the most extensively documented medicinal plants in human history. Let that sink in. Every spring, millions of homeowners wage chemical warfare against a plant that traditional Chinese medicine has used for liver and digestive support for over 1,000 years. Ayurvedic practitioners called it a cooling bitter. Native American nations across the Great Plains used the roots for stomach complaints and the leaves as a spring tonic to shake off winter sluggishness. And here's where modern science walks in and says, actually, they were right. Clinical research has confirmed that dandelion possesses legitimate diuretic properties. It helps the body move excess fluid without the potassium depletion that pharmaceutical diuretics often cause. A 2009 pilot study published in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine found that dandelion leaf extract increased urinary frequency in human subjects within just 5 hours of ingestion. The compounds doing the work include chicoraic acid and luteolin, both potent antioxidants that show up in studies on inflammation and oxidative stress. Now picture the plant itself. You know it. Jagged, tooth-shaped leaves radiating from a central rosette. The name literally comes from the French dent de lion, tooth of the lion. Snap the stem and you get that bitter white sap on your fingers, slightly sticky, faintly vegetal. The bright yellow flower heads smell like warm grass and pollen, and when they go to seed, they become the iconic puffball that kids blow into the wind. Every part of this plant, leaf, root, flower, has traditional uses. People steep the leaves into tea for gentle digestive support. The roasted root has served as a coffee substitute for centuries. Herbalists in European traditions used root decoctions for what they described as liver support, and modern hepatoprotective studies, primarily in animal models, suggest this wasn't just folk imagination. Here's a number that should stop you. A single dandelion plant can produce up to 15,000 seeds per year, each one carried on that papery parachute structure that kids blow into the wind. The plant is designed for abundance. It thrives in poor soil, cracked pavement, and compacted clay, conditions that defeat most cultivated crops. So why did we forget? Because dandelion is everywhere. It's too common to be taken seriously. It can't be patented. No pharmaceutical company is going to invest in marketing a plant that grows for free in every sidewalk crack on the planet. And here's the twist that should stay with you. The thing you've been poisoning in your front yard is what your great-grandmother would have harvested in hers. It's like having a maintenance crew for your digestion growing in the cracks of your driveway and paying someone to destroy it. That's just the first plant. And it's the one most people dismiss the fastest. Now step off the lawn and onto the trail, or the sidewalk, or any patch of compacted dirt where foot traffic has beaten the ground flat. Look down, those broad, ribbed leaves hugging the earth like green platters. That's plantain, and not the banana relative. We're talking about Plantago major, the trailside first aid kit. And what you're looking at is one of the oldest wound care plants in recorded European herbalism. The Anglo-Saxons listed it in the Nine Herbs Charm, a 10th century healing text that treated it as one of the essential medicines against infection and venom. Roman soldiers reportedly carried plantain leaves to press against March blisters and minor wounds. And when English colonists arrived in North America, indigenous peoples noticed the plant spreading along settler footpaths and called it white man's footprint. It literally followed human movement, growing wherever the soil was packed down. Here's the part that makes a modern biologist nod. Plantain contains aucubin, an iridoid glycoside with documented anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial activity. Studies published in journals like Planta Medica have confirmed that aucubin promotes wound healing and shows activity against certain bacterial strains. The leaves also contain allantoin, the same compound used in commercial skin repair creams, along with mucilage that creates a soothing, protective layer when the leaf is crushed and applied to skin. What does this look like in practice? A hiker with a bee sting or a blister crushes a plantain leaf, chews it briefly or mashes it between their fingers, and presses it against the irritation as a poultice. Herbalists call this the spit poultice, and people who've used it report rapid relief from itching, stinging, and minor swelling. Wilderness survival instructors teach plantain identification specifically because of its utility in trail scenarios where you're hours from a pharmacy, a bug bite, a nettle sting, a scrape from a fall. The leaves themselves are thick and slightly rubbery, with prominent parallel veins running lengthwise. Once you learn to spot them, you realize they're everywhere. Sidewalk edges, park trails, gravel driveways. The smell when you crush them is green and faintly grassy, the texture fibrous and moist. The taste, if you're curious, is mildly bitter and earthy, not unpleasant. The reason this one got sidelined is painfully simple. It's free, it's underfoot, and it does something that a tube of hydrocortisone cream does, but you can't put plantain in a blister pack and sell it at a pharmacy for $8. It's like having an emergency room growing in every trailhead in the country and nobody posting a sign. If these first two plants are already shifting how you see a sidewalk, keep going, we're just warming up. This next one doesn't even get the dignity of being called a weed by most people. It's that sticky, clinging vine that grabs your socks and pant legs when you walk through overgrown fields. Cleavers, the lymph mover. Its botanical name is Galium aparine, but you probably know the sensation of it better than the name. Tiny hook-like hairs covering the stems and leaves, latching onto fabric and fur like botanical Velcro. It grows in sprawling, tangled mats along fences, hedgerows, and shady forest edges throughout Europe and North America, and most people consider it a nuisance. But traditional European herbalists considered it essential. Nicholas Culpeper, the 17th century English herbalist, whose complete herbal remains one of the most referenced texts in Western plant medicine, documented cleavers as a lymphatic tonic, something that supports the body's lymph system in moving fluid and clearing congestion. European folk traditions used cleavers juice and tea for swollen glands, skin conditions, and what herbalists described as sluggish detoxification. Modern research on cleavers is limited compared to some of the heavy hitters coming later in this list, and that's worth stating honestly. There's supportive evidence for its diuretic properties, and its traditional lymphatic reputation aligns with its historical pattern of use across multiple European traditions. Some preliminary studies have identified iridoid glycosides and flavonoids in cleavers that could explain some of the reported effects, but large-scale clinical trials haven't materialized. What people do with it is simple. They juice the fresh plant or steep it as a cold infusion, cold water overnight, and drink it as a springtime tonic. The taste is mild, slightly green, unremarkable. The texture of the fresh plant is the memorable part. That clinging, scratchy stickiness that makes it impossible to ignore once it's on your clothes. The stems are thin and squarish, the leaves arranged in whorls of 6 to 8 around each node, and the tiny white flowers are almost too small to notice. The whole plant has a pale, translucent green quality, delicate looking despite being an aggressive grower. It scrambles over fences and hedgerows like it's trying to get somewhere. And in a traditional herbalist's garden, that energy was considered a signature of its function. A plant that moves and circulates, used for a body that needs to move and circulate. Why forgotten? Because it clings to you and annoys you, and nobody's going to market a plant that sticks to your socks as a wellness product. But your great-grandmother's herbalist might have prescribed it as a seasonal tune-up for the lymphatic system. It's like a maintenance flush for your body's drainage network, growing along every neglected fence line you've ever walked past. If cleavers was the neglected fence line plant, this next one is the quiet invader of garden beds. The one you pull up by the handful every spring and toss into the compost without a second thought. Chickweed, the skin soother, is Stellaria media, and it is arguably the most underestimated topical plant in the temperate world. Small, star-shaped white flowers, thin, sprawling stems with a single line of fine hairs running along one side. A botanical signature so distinctive that once you notice it, you'll identify chickweed instantly for the rest of your life. It grows low and dense in moist soil, in garden beds, between pavers, under shrubs, and across any disturbed ground that gets partial shade. It smells like fresh lettuce. It tastes mild and slightly sweet. And across centuries of European herbalism, it was the go-to plant for skin irritation. Traditional herbalists made chickweed salves and poultices for itching, rashes, eczema flare-ups, and minor burns. The plant contains saponins, natural compounds that have demonstrated anti-itch and anti-inflammatory properties in laboratory studies. It also contains mucilage and flavonoids that contribute to its soothing, cooling effect on irritated skin. A review in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology noted its long-standing role in European folk medicine for dermatological complaints. And while large randomized controlled trials remain sparse, the phytochemical profile supports the traditional applications. People use it simply: crush the fresh plant into a poultice for immediate relief from an insect bite or a patch of contact dermatitis, or infuse it into oil over several weeks to create a homemade skin-soothing balm. The effect that herbalists and users describe is cooling, calming, the kind of immediate sensory relief that makes you understand why grandmothers kept this knowledge alive. And here's the twist. The plant that millions of gardeners rip out of their vegetable beds every spring contains compounds that mirror what's in the anti-itch cream they buy at the drugstore. It's like growing your own dermatology counter in the gaps between your tomato plants and refusing to notice. We're only 4 plants in, and the pattern should be unmistakable by now. Common, dismissed, documented, powerful. Now let's talk about the one that pulls everything in Act 1 together. The plant that shows you just how deep this pattern runs. Mullein, the lung cleaner, is Verbascum thapsus, and if you've ever driven past a rocky hillside, a gravel roadside, or an abandoned field and seen tall, dramatic stalks rising from fuzzy silver-green rosettes, you've seen it. Mullein is unmistakable. First-year plants form ground-hugging rosettes of thick, velvety leaves covered in fine hairs, soft as flannel, big as your hand. Second-year plants send up flowering stalks that can tower 5 or 6 feet, studded with small yellow flowers. The whole plant feels like it was designed to get your attention. And for thousands of years, it did. Greek physicians used mullein for respiratory complaints over 2,000 years ago. Dioscorides, the Roman-era pharmacologist whose De Materia Medica influenced Western herbalism for 15 centuries, documented it. In the Appalachian Mountains of the eastern United States, mullein became a cornerstone of folk respiratory care. People smoked the dried leaves to soothe irritated lungs or steeped them in teas for coughs and congestion. The science behind it is real. Mullein contains saponins, which are natural expectorant compounds that help loosen mucus. It also contains mucilage, a thick, gel-like substance that coats and soothes irritated mucous membranes. Together, these compounds create a dual action: loosening congestion while calming inflammation in the respiratory tract. People make mullein leaf tea by steeping the dried leaves and straining carefully through a cloth to filter out the tiny hairs that can irritate the throat. The resulting liquid is golden, mild, and slightly sweet. far more drinkable than you'd expect from a roadside plant. Mullein flower oil, made by infusing the small yellow blossoms in olive oil for several weeks, has been used traditionally for earaches. In Appalachian communities, mullein was sometimes called cowboy toilet paper, a nod to the large, soft, velvety leaves, but it was also kept dried in kitchen cupboards for the first sign of a winter cough. Some Native American traditions burned dried mullein and inhaled the smoke for lung congestion, a practice that seems counterintuitive but reflects a long tradition of smoke-based respiratory remedies across multiple cultures. Why was this one shelved? Because cough suppressants came in bottles with dosage labels and insurance codes, and mullein grows for free on hillsides nobody owns. It's like having a respiratory therapist rooted into every rocky slope and abandoned lot, waiting to be recognized. The original cough drop before cough drops existed, and if these 5 common plants, dandelion, plantain, cleavers, chickweed, and mullein, already have you rethinking what weed means, then brace yourself. Because we're now crossing into the second act, where the plants get more powerful, the histories get more dramatic, and the modern research gets harder to ignore. We're building towards something. Keep going. Now we're getting to where things get serious. Everything up to this point was the foundation, common plants that most people walk past. But this next tier, these are the ones with battlefield histories, epidemic resumes, and clinical trial data that would make a skeptic pause. Let's keep moving. Yarrow, the battlefield stitch, is one of the most storied wound care plants in human history, and its reputation starts with a name. Its botanical designation is Achillea millefolium, named directly after Achilles, the Greek warrior who, according to legend, used yarrow to treat his soldiers' wounds during the Trojan War. That's not just mythology wearing a lab coat, it's a cultural memory tag that stuck because the plant's hemostatic properties were so well known that no other name would do. For over 3,000 years, across Greek, Roman, Chinese, and Native American traditions, yarrow was the plant you reached for when someone was bleeding. European battlefield medics carried it. Civil War soldiers packed it into wounds. The common folk name, soldier's woundwort, tells you everything about its job description. And modern research has caught up. Yarrow contains achillean, an alkaloid that has demonstrated the ability to shorten bleeding time. It also contains chamazoline and flavonoids with anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. Studies in journals like Phytotherapy Research have confirmed anti-inflammatory activity, and the plant's astringent tannins contribute to its ability to tighten tissue and slow blood flow from minor wounds. The plant itself is elegant, finely divided, feathery leaves that look almost fern-like, earning it the name millefolium, 1,000 leaves. Flat-topped clusters of tiny white or pale pink flowers that bloom from early summer through fall. It smells sharp and herbaceous, somewhere between chamomile and sage, and the leaves have a slightly fuzzy, soft texture. You'll find it in meadows, roadsides, fields, and the edges of hiking trails across every temperate continent. People apply crushed yarrow leaves directly to minor cuts and scrapes as a field poultice. Herbalists also prepare it as a tea for digestive support and fever management. The fever-breaking tradition is so old that the plant is still called Herba militaris in some European texts. The taste in tea is bitter and astringent, the kind of flavor that tells your tongue something is happening. Why did yarrow fade from common knowledge? Same story. You can't patent a wildflower that grows in every meadow. What replaced it were adhesive bandages with antibiotic ointment. Effective, sure, but yarrow was the original version, field-tested by actual soldiers in actual wars. Think about that for a moment. A plant that was trusted enough to carry into combat, where the consequences of failure are death, got replaced by a product in a cardboard box. It's like having a battlefield medic rooted in the nearest meadow, and nobody knows its name anymore. And here's something worth noting. Yarrow doesn't just stop at wound care. Traditional herbalists used yarrow tea for fevers, menstrual complaints, and digestive support. The bitter compounds stimulate digestive secretions, and the plant's diaphoretic properties, its ability to promote sweating, made it a go-to for managing fevers before acetaminophen existed. One plant, multiple applications, 3,000 years of service. That's not a weed. That's a medicine cabinet with roots. This next one is going to look familiar. Those round, puffy, pink-purple flower heads growing in fields and lawn edges that bees love. Red clover, the blood purifier, is Trifolium pratense, and its traditional reputation stretches across European and Native American herbalism as a deep cleansing plant. European folk traditions used red clover infusions for skin conditions, respiratory complaints, and what herbalists historically described as blood purification, a concept that modern medicine doesn't use in quite the same way, but which pointed toward the plant's ability to support circulation and lymphatic function. Here's where it gets interesting for a modern reader. Red clover is one of the richest plant sources of isoflavones, specifically biochenin A, formononetin, genistein, and didzine. These are phytoestrogens, plant-based compounds that interact with estrogen receptors in the body, and they've been the subject of extensive clinical research. Multiple randomized controlled trials have investigated red clover isoflavones for menopausal symptoms, and a meta-analysis published in the journal Maturitas found statistically significant reductions in hot flash frequency compared to placebo. The traditional cancer-adjacent folk use is more complex and needs honest framing. Red clover was a component of several historical herbal cancer formulas, including the Hoxsey formula, which was controversial and never validated by controlled trials. However, laboratory studies have shown that red clover isoflavones possess antioxidant and anti-proliferative properties in cell models. Red clover itself is beautiful in an understated way. Dense, globe-shaped flower heads made of tiny tubular florets, ranging from pink to deep magenta. The leaves are the classic triple leaflet clover shape, often marked with a pale chevron. It smells faintly sweet and honey-like, and the flowers have a mild, pleasant taste when nibbled fresh or steeped into tea. You'll find it in meadows, pastures, roadsides, and the unsprayed margins of lawns. People steep the dried flower heads into a gentle tea, one of the mildest tasting herbal infusions you'll encounter. Traditional herbalists recommended long infusions for maximum isoflavone extraction. The reason this one got sidelined is partly about perception and partly about the pharmaceutical economics of menopause treatment. Hormone replacement therapy became the dominant medical approach, and a meadow flower couldn't compete with a prescription pad. But the isoflavone research keeps coming back to red clover. It's like a hormone-balancing support system growing in every pasture, and most people just see a pretty flower the bees like. If you're starting to realize how much documented power is hiding in ordinary landscapes, you're exactly where you should be. And we're just getting started with this act. Here's one that actually made headlines, and then got quietly forgotten again. Elderberry, the epidemic shield, is Sambucus nigra, and its story reads like a thriller. During the 1995 Panama flu epidemic, a small but notable clinical study led by virologist Dr. Madeleine Mumkwoglu found that elderberry extract significantly reduced the duration and severity of influenza symptoms. Patients taking elderberry recovered an average of 4 days faster than those on placebo. But here's the thing. Traditional healers knew this centuries before anyone ran a trial. Elderberry has been used as an immune support remedy across European folk medicine since at least the medieval period. During plague outbreaks, elderberry preparations were among the herbal remedies documented in household remedy books. Hippocrates reportedly referred to the elder tree as his medicine chest. Native American nations used different Sambucus species for fever, infection, and pain. What's doing the work? Anthocyanins, the dark purple pigments that give elderberries their color. These flavonoids have potent antioxidant and antiviral properties. Research suggests they may work by inhibiting viral replication and by modulating the immune response, helping the body mount a defense without overreacting. The berries also contain vitamins A, C, and B6, plus a range of other polyphenols that contribute to the overall immune supportive profile. The berries hang in heavy, dark purple clusters from large shrubs or small trees. They have a distinctive, musky sweet smell when ripe and an intensely tart, almost astringent taste when raw. The leaves are pinnate, multiple pointed leaflets arranged along a central stem, and the whole plant is recognizable once you know it. Important note: raw elderberries and the plant's leaves, bark, and unripe berries contain compounds that can cause nausea, so traditional preparation always involves cooking the berries or processing them into syrups, tinctures, or jams. Elderberry syrup is the most common preparation. Cooked berries, often with honey, ginger, and cloves. And it's become one of the few traditional remedies to cross back into mainstream awareness. You can find it in health food stores now, sometimes at prices that would make your herbalist grandmother laugh, because the plants grow wild along riverbanks, forest edges, and hedgerows across much of the northern hemisphere. In rural Europe, elder trees were considered so valuable that folklore traditions warned against cutting them down. In some English and Scandinavian communities, it was said you had to ask the tree's permission before harvesting, a cultural mechanism that may have functioned to prevent overexploitation of a critical medicinal resource. Why did it get forgotten? Because antiviral medications became the prestige response to flu season, and a berry that grows on a bush couldn't get an insurance code. It's like having an immune response accelerator growing along every stream bank, and the medical system just looked the other way. Keep going, because the next one is where the real shock happens. If you've ever been stung, and you know exactly what that sharp electric bite feels like, then you've already met this plant. Stinging nettle, the iron fortress, is Urtica dioica, and it's one of the most paradoxical plants in the herbal world. The thing that hurts you on contact is also one of the most nutrient-dense, medicinally documented plants in the northern hemisphere. The sting comes from tiny hollow hairs on the stems and leaves that inject a cocktail of histamine, acetylcholine, and formic acid into your skin when brushed. Your body's inflammatory response kicks in immediately, producing that familiar burning welt. But here's the twist that makes herbalists smile. Once processed, dried, cooked, or steeped, those stinging compounds are neutralized, and what's left is an extraordinary nutritional and medicinal profile. Nettle is remarkably high in iron, calcium, magnesium, silica, and vitamins A, C, and K. It has been used as a food and medicine across European, Asian, and Native American traditions for millennia. In the Roman era, soldiers stationed in cold climates reportedly flogged themselves with fresh nettles, a practice called urtication, to stimulate circulation and warm their bodies. Nettle's anti-inflammatory properties go beyond the sting. The plant itself is tall, upright, with serrated, heart-shaped leaves arranged in opposite pairs along a squarish stem. It grows in rich, disturbed soil, forest edges, riverbanks, abandoned gardens, and the moist margins of fields. When fresh, it has a green, slightly metallic smell. People drink nettle tea, cook young nettle tops like spinach, or take dried nettle in capsule form. It's one of the few plants equally respected as food and medicine. In Northern European traditions, spring nettle soup was a staple, a way to replenish mineral stores after a long winter on preserved food. The young tips, harvested before the plant flowers, are tender and rich. Traditional herbalists recommended it as a spring tonic for its mineral content, particularly for supporting healthy iron levels. The dried leaf tea has a grassy, hay-like aroma and a mineral-rich, slightly vegetal taste. The fresh plant, before processing, is covered in those fine, stinging hairs, particularly on the stems and undersides of the leaves. The leaves themselves are dark green, deeply serrated, and tapered to a point. Handsome, actually, once you get past the reputation. Why is this one not in every kitchen? Because it stings you, and that first impression is hard to overcome. The very defense mechanism that protects the plant is the reason people avoid it. It's like having a nutrient-dense superfood and anti-inflammatory pharmacy growing along every stream bank, guarded by a bouncer made of microscopic needles. Get past the bouncer and you have access to one of nature's most generous plants. Now, here's one that earned its reputation in the worst conditions imaginable. Calendula. The wound accelerator is Calendula officinalis, and if you've ever seen bright orange marigold-type flowers in a garden, you may have been looking at one of the most clinically studied wound-healing plants in Western herbalism. But calendula's story isn't a garden story, it's a war story. During World War I, when antiseptics were scarce and field hospitals were overwhelmed, calendula preparations were used on open wounds, surgical incisions, and burns. The American Eclectic Physicians, a movement of doctors who integrated herbal and conventional medicine in the 19th and early 20th centuries, considered calendula one of their most important topical remedies. And they weren't guessing. Modern research has validated calendula's wound-healing properties with unusual thoroughness. Studies in journals like Wound Repair and Regeneration have demonstrated that calendula extracts promote tissue granulation, increase collagen production, and accelerate wound closure. The flowers are stunning, bright orange to deep gold, with layered petals radiating from a central disc, slightly sticky to the touch and resinous. They have a distinctive, peppery, slightly bitter smell, not unpleasant, but unmistakably medicinal. The leaves are pale green, oblong, and slightly fuzzy. Calendula grows easily in gardens, disturbed ground, and field edges across temperate regions. The name comes from the Latin calendae, the first day of each month, because in mild climates, the plant flowers nearly year-round. People infuse the dried flowers into oils and salves for topical application on minor wounds, rashes, dry skin, and mild burns. Calendula tea is used as a wash for skin irritations. The preparation is gentle enough that it's one of the few herbal remedies traditional midwives used on newborns, and it remains one of the most common ingredients in natural baby care products today, from diaper creams to bath soaks. Why did calendula fade? Because petroleum-based ointments and synthetic wound creams became the standard, and a flower couldn't compete with a tube of antibiotic ointment in a branded box. But the research keeps accumulating, and the flowers keep growing. It's like having a tissue regeneration lab in your garden bed and choosing the pharmacy aisle instead. If this list is blowing your mind, do something with that feeling. Share this with someone who needs it. This isn't just entertainment. It's a knowledge reclamation, and the more people who see it, the harder this information is to lose again. The active compounds include triterpenoids, particularly ferradiol and arnidiol, which have strong anti-inflammatory effects, along with flavonoids and carotenoids that contribute antioxidant protection. One clinical trial on post-surgical wound healing found that calendula cream significantly improved healing speed and reduced complications compared to standard care alone. The name comes from the Latin calendae, the first day of each month, because in mild climates, the plant flowers nearly year-round. Every month, flowers. Every month, medicine. Let's slow down for one moment on a plant that everybody knows and almost nobody takes seriously. Chamomile, the silent healer, is so associated with bedtime tea and relaxation branding that its actual medicinal depth gets buried under marketing. But chamomile, specifically Matricaria chamomilla, German chamomile, is one of the most thoroughly studied medicinal plants on Earth, and its story goes back to the pharaohs. Ancient Egyptians dedicated chamomile to their sun god Ra and used it for fever and skin conditions. Greek physicians, including Dioscorides, documented it for digestive and inflammatory complaints. In medieval European herbalism, chamomile was one of the foundational simples, a plant so broadly useful it appeared in nearly every household remedy chest. The name itself comes from the Greek chamai melon, ground apple, because the flowers smell like fresh apples when crushed. The key compound is apigenin, a flavonoid that binds to benzodiazepine receptors in the brain, the same receptors targeted by pharmaceutical anti-anxiety medications like Valium. A 2009 clinical trial published in the Journal of Clinical Psychopharmacology found that chamomile extract produced significant reductions in generalized anxiety disorder symptoms compared to placebo. And it doesn't stop at anxiety. Studies have demonstrated chamomile's efficacy for gastrointestinal complaints, including irritable bowel syndrome, with antispasmodic and anti-inflammatory effects in the gut. One review in Molecular Medicine reports cataloged over a dozen studied therapeutic properties, from anti-diabetic to antimicrobial. The flowers are small, daisy-like, with white petals surrounding a raised yellow center that's hollow when cut in cross-section. A key identification feature: the scent is warm, sweet, apple-like, immediately recognizable. People drink chamomile tea, the most common herbal tea in the Western world, for sleep support, digestive calm, and general relaxation. Topically, chamomile is applied as a wash or compress for skin inflammation and minor wounds. It's gentle enough for children and has been used in pediatric folk medicine for centuries. Why does nobody take it seriously? Because it became a grocery store commodity. When something is sold for $2 in a box of 20 tea bags next to the instant oatmeal, it's psychologically impossible for most people to believe it contains a compound that targets the same brain receptors as a controlled substance. That's the power of packaging. What you thought was a mild bedtime drink is actually a documented anxiolytic and anti-inflammatory with 3,000 years of cross-cultural validation. Ancient Egyptian priests used it in embalming rituals and healing ceremonies. Greek physicians prescribed it for intestinal discomfort. German herbalists, who have one of the most rigorous traditions of clinical plant medicine in Europe, made chamomile one of their foundational medicines. It's like discovering that the quiet person in the room has been a black belt the entire time, unassuming, underpriced, and quietly more powerful than anything else on the shelf. The fact that chamomile is so well known, yet so profoundly underestimated, tells you everything about how familiarity breeds dismissal in our culture. And that pattern, powerful, common, ignored, is exactly what we're dismantling with every entry on this list. We're picking up speed now because the next plant has a resume that spans Persian empires and modern neuroscience labs. Lemon balm, the nerve tamer, is Melissa officinalis, a member of the mint family that's been prescribed for anxiety and cognitive function since the medieval Islamic Golden Age. Persian physicians, building on earlier Greek traditions, documented lemon balm for melancholia, heart palpitations, and what they described as disorders of the nervous temperament. Avicenna, the 11th century polymath whose canon of medicine shaped medical education for 500 years, recommended lemon balm for lifting the spirits and strengthening the mind. Modern research is confirming exactly what Avicenna described. The primary active compound is rosmarinic acid, a phenolic compound with potent antioxidant and neuroprotective properties. The plant is unassuming but fragrant, soft, crinkled, serrated leaves that release a bright lemon scent when rubbed between your fingers. The smell is unmistakable, clean, citrusy, uplifting. It grows in garden beds, along walls, in disturbed soil, and throughout temperate regions. Small white flowers appear in summer. The taste in tea is light, lemony, and refreshing. One of the more pleasant herbal infusions. People steep fresh or dried leaves for a calming tea, particularly in the evening. Traditional herbalists used it for digestive complaints as well, since the aromatic compounds have carminative, gas-relieving, properties. It's also used topically for cold sores, where studies have shown antiviral activity against herpes simplex virus. Why is this one overlooked? Because it grows easily, smells nice, and doesn't look dramatic. It's too gentle, too pleasant, too accessible. A pharmaceutical anxiolytic comes with a prescription, a copay, and a sense of seriousness. A lemon-scented leaf in your garden doesn't have that clinical gravitas, even when the clinical data says it should. It's like having a neuroscience-backed stress management tool growing next to your patio and treating it as a garnish. A 2014 study in the Journal of Neurology, Neurosurgery, and Psychiatry found that lemon balm extract improved cognitive function and reduced agitation in patients with Alzheimer's disease. Other clinical trials have shown significant anxiolytic effects, reduced anxiety, and improved calmness in healthy volunteers after a single dose. One study published in Nutrients noted improved mood and cognitive performance following lemon balm supplementation. It grows in garden beds, along walls, in disturbed soil, and throughout temperate regions. Small white flowers appear in summer. Traditional herbalists used it for digestive complaints as well, since the aromatic compounds have carminative, gas-relieving properties. It's also used topically for cold sores, where studies have shown antiviral activity against herpes simplex virus. And now we arrive at one that connects the deep past to the literal structure of your body. Horsetail, the bone builder, is Equisetum arvense, and it's not just old. It's ancient in a way that nothing else on this list can match. Horsetail is a living fossil. Its ancestors dominated the planet over 300 million years ago, during the Carboniferous period. The plant you see today, slender, segmented, jointed stems with whorls of needle-like branches, looking almost like a miniature green bottle brush, is a direct descendant of those primordial giants. It's the oldest surviving genus of vascular plants on Earth, and its traditional use is almost as old as its lineage is deep. Roman physicians documented horsetail for kidney and urinary support. Medieval European herbalists, including Culpeper, used it for bleeding, wound care, and what they described as strengthening the body's connective structures. Modern analysis reveals why. Horsetail is one of the highest natural sources of bioavailable silica, a mineral critical for collagen synthesis, bone density, and connective tissue integrity. The plant grows in wet, sandy, or clay-rich soils, stream banks, ditch edges, railroad embankments, and moist roadsides. It feels rough and gritty to the touch because of its silica content, so abrasive, in fact, that frontier settlers used it to scour pots and pans, earning it the name scouring rush. The taste in tea is mineral and earthy, almost chalky. People prepare horsetail as a decoction, simmered, not just steeped, to extract the silica or take it in capsule or tincture form. Traditional herbalists recommended it for brittle nails, thinning hair, and weakening bones, particularly in older adults. Why forgotten? Because calcium supplements dominated the bone health conversation, and a prehistoric-looking reed growing in a ditch couldn't compete with a chalky tablet. But silica research is increasingly showing that calcium alone isn't the full story. The scaffolding that holds mineral in bone requires silica, and horsetail delivers it in a form the body recognizes. It's like having a structural engineer for your skeleton growing in every wet ditch, older than the dinosaurs, and still doing its job. Now we enter the legendary tier. If these mid-range plants had you reevaluating what grows in your backyard, what's coming next is going to rewrite what you thought about medicine itself. Modern analysis reveals why. Horsetail is one of the highest natural sources of bioavailable silica, a mineral critical for collagen synthesis, bone density, and connective tissue integrity. Silica serves as a cofactor in the production of collagen and elastin, the structural proteins that hold your body together. Studies in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition and others have shown that supplemental silica can improve bone mineral density and support connective tissue health. Remember at the very beginning of this list, when we said one of these plants is literally the ancestor of a drug in your medicine cabinet? This is that plant. This is the payoff. White willow bark, the original aspirin, is Salix alba, and its story is the single most dramatic example of traditional plant medicine being validated, extracted, synthesized, and then forgotten as a plant. The bark of the white willow tree contains salicin, a compound that the human body converts into salicylic acid, the direct biochemical precursor of aspirin. When Bayer synthesized acetylsalicylic acid in 1897 and branded it as aspirin, they were refining a compound that human beings had been chewing off trees for thousands of years. How many thousands? The Ebers Papyrus, an Egyptian medical text dating to around 1550 BCE, documents willow bark for pain and fever. Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, prescribed willow bark tea for headaches and inflammation in the 5th century BCE. Traditional Chinese medicine used willow for similar purposes. Native American nations across North America chewed willow bark for pain relief long before European contact. Modern research confirms what every one of those traditions observed. Salicin has documented analgesic, anti-inflammatory, and antipyretic properties. Clinical trials published in journals like Phytomedicine and Rheumatology have demonstrated that willow bark extract provides significant relief for lower back pain and osteoarthritis. The white willow tree is graceful and distinctive. Long, narrow, silver-green leaves that shimmer in the wind, giving the tree its name. The bark is furrowed and grayish, and when stripped and dried, it has a bitter, astringent taste. The bitterness is the salicin announcing itself. Willow trees grow along rivers, streams, lakes, and in any soil that stays moist. People traditionally chewed small pieces of bark or steeped it into a tea for headaches, joint pain, and fever. Herbalists recommend willow bark tea for mild to moderate pain, noting that it tends to be gentler on the stomach than aspirin because the salicin is converted gradually in the body rather than hitting the stomach lining all at once. Why was this one forgotten? Not because it failed, because it succeeded so spectacularly that the pharmaceutical industry extracted its essence, synthesized it, packaged it, and made the source plant irrelevant. Willow bark didn't get dismissed. It got strip-mined. The tree that gave humanity aspirin got left standing by the river while the pill went global. It's like a songwriter who wrote the biggest hit of the century and never got credited on the album. That revelation alone should change how you think about the relationship between plants and pills. But we're not done, not even close. This next one takes us into the darkness of wartime because some plants earn their legendary status in the worst moments of human history. Valerian, the wartime sedative, is Valeriana officinalis, and while most people associate it vaguely with sleep supplements, its real story is written in trenches and bomb shelters. During World War I, valerian was used to treat soldiers suffering from shell shock. During the London Blitz in World War II, and British civilians took valerian to manage the anxiety of nightly bombing raids. It was considered so essential for morale and mental stability that it was included in civilian and military medicinal supply lists. But valerian's history predates modern warfare by a wide margin. Hippocrates described it. Galen, the 2nd century Roman physician, prescribed it specifically for insomnia. Medieval herbalists called it all heal for its breadth of applications. The science explains the folklore. Valerian root contains valerianic acid, a compound that modulates GABA receptors in the brain. GABA being the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter responsible for calming neural activity. This is the same system targeted by benzodiazepines and barbiturates, though valerian's effect is gentler and non-addictive. The plant itself is tall and elegant, with pennate leaves and clusters of tiny pale pink or white flowers that bloom in summer. But here's the unforgettable part: the root. When you dig up valerian root and dry it, it releases an odor that is intensely pungent, earthy, musky, and frankly unpleasant to most people. Some describe it as smelling like old socks. Cats, however, are attracted to it in a way similar to catnip. The fresh plant above ground is unremarkable, growing in moist meadows, forest edges, and along streams across Europe and Asia. It's the root system, thick, tangled, and powerfully aromatic, that holds the medicine. People take valerian as a dried root tea, tincture, or capsule, typically 30 minutes to an hour before sleep. The taste is strong and earthy, not pleasant, but not unbearable. Traditional herbalists often combined it with other calming plants like passion flower or hops to improve both the flavor and the effect. In German phytotherapy, one of the most scientifically rigorous traditions of herbal medicine, where plant preparations have been prescribed by physicians for decades, valerian is recognized as a standard treatment for sleep disturbances. Germany's Commission E, the regulatory body that evaluates herbal medicines, approved valerian for restlessness and sleep disorders based on its historical use and available clinical data. Why did it get relegated to the supplement aisle? because pharmaceutical sleep medications offered faster, more predictable results, along with dependency risk, hangover effects, and a list of side effects that valerian largely avoids. A root that smells bad and works gently couldn't compete with a pill that knocked you out in 20 minutes. It's like a quiet counselor who actually helps versus a sledgehammer that puts you to sleep but leaves damage behind. The counselor was always the better option, just not the dramatic one. If you've ever stood in a supplement aisle and seen purple coneflower on a box of immune support capsules, you've seen the commercial shadow of something much deeper. Echinacea, the immune accelerator, is one of the most commercially successful herbal products in the modern Western world, and yet most people who buy it have no idea where it came from or how it actually works. The plant's real story begins on the Great Plains of North America. And it's not a supplement story, it's a survival story. The Plains nations, including the Lakota, Cheyenne, Comanche, and Pawnee, used echinacea more extensively than almost any other medicinal plant. Echinacea angustifolia and Echinacea purpurea were applied to wounds, infections, snake bites, and toothaches. The roots were chewed for sore throats and used as a topical analgesic. Modern immunology has investigated echinacea with unusual intensity. The active compounds include alkylamides, polysaccharides, and caphtoric acid, which together modulate immune function through multiple pathways. The plant is striking, tall, sturdy stems topped by large, daisy-like flowers with drooping petals in purple, pink, or white, surrounding a spiny, raised center cone. The name echinacea comes from the Greek echinos, hedgehog, because that center cone looks like a tiny rolled-up hedgehog. The roots have a characteristic numbing, tingling sensation when chewed. The fresh plant above ground is unremarkable, growing in moist meadows, forest edges, and along streams across Europe and Asia. It's the root system, thick, tangled, and powerfully aromatic, that holds the medicine. People take echinacea as tinctures, teas, or capsules, typically at the first sign of a cold. The tingling sensation from the root tincture is actually a quality indicator. It means the alkylamides are present and active. Why did it get sidelined? Because antibiotics became the dominant paradigm for infection, and echinacea got reclassified from medicine to supplement, a regulatory distinction that diminished its cultural authority even as the science continued to support specific immune modulatory effects. It's like having an immune training coach that was demoted to the bench when the heavy-hitter pharmaceutical starters showed up. But the starter roster has its own problems. Antibiotic resistance is growing, and the coach on the bench might be worth listening to again. Now we're talking about the plant that has more clinical trials behind it than some pharmaceutical drugs. Turmeric, the inflammation master, is Curcuma longa, and if you've ever cooked with it or seen that vivid golden yellow powder, you already know it with your eyes. But what you may not know is the depth of what's behind that color. Ayurvedic medicine has used turmeric for over 4,000 years. It is foundational to Ayurvedic practice, categorized as a rasayana, a rejuvenative substance, and used for joint pain, digestive complaints, wound healing, and skin conditions. Traditional Chinese medicine used it for blood circulation and pain. Across Southeast Asia, turmeric has been woven into food, ritual, and medicine for millennia. When modern molecular biology examined curcumin, it discovered a compound that modulates the NF-κB signaling pathway, a master regulator of inflammation in the body. A clinical trial published in the Journal of Clinical Investigation found that curcumin demonstrated anti-inflammatory potency comparable to some pharmaceutical anti-inflammatory drugs without the gastrointestinal side effects. The plant is tropical, large, broad leaves emerging from a central stalk, grown from a knobby rhizome that looks similar to ginger. When you cut the fresh rhizome, the inside is an intense, saturated orange gold. The smell is warm, earthy, and slightly peppery. The taste is bitter with a slow, warm heat. The dried powder stains everything it touches. Your fingers, your clothes, your cutting board. People consume turmeric in food, golden milk lattes, capsules, and paste. There's an important nuance. Curcumin has poor bioavailability on its own, meaning the body absorbs very little of it. Traditional preparations always combined turmeric with fat, ghee in Ayurvedic cooking, and black pepper, which contains piperine, a compound that increases curcumin absorption by up to 2,000%. The ancestors figured out the bioavailability problem through practice long before pharmacokinetics existed as a field. Why isn't this treated as a serious anti-inflammatory tool? Because it's a kitchen spice. It costs pennies per dose. It can't be patented. And a golden root from a tropical plant lacks the clinical gravitas of a white pill in a white bottle. But the NF-κB pathway doesn't care about packaging. It responds to molecular structure. And curcumin's structure is documented, validated, and quietly powerful. It's like having a master switch for inflammation sitting in your spice cabinet, and most people only reach for it when they're making curry. Here's the last entry in the legendary tier, and it's the one that hits closest to a specific kind of suffering that millions of people deal with. Feverfew, the migraine breaker, is Tanacetum parthenium, and its name literally tells you its oldest reputation, febrifuge, the fever reducer. But it's the migraine story that made feverfew legendary in the herbal world and caught the attention of modern neurology. Medieval European herbalists used feverfew for headaches, fever, and joint pain. The plant was so common in monastery gardens that it became standard in monastic herbal pharmacopoeias, the collections of plant remedies maintained by religious orders who were the primary healthcare providers across much of Europe for centuries. A landmark study published in The Lancet in 1988 found that feverfew significantly reduced the frequency and severity of migraine attacks compared to placebo. The compound responsible is parthenolide, a sesquiterpene lactone that inhibits platelet aggregation and blocks the release of serotonin from platelets. The plant is small, bushy, and cheerful-looking, finely divided, yellowish-green leaves with a strong, bitter, aromatic scent. Some people describe it as reminiscent of citrus and camphor. Small daisy-like flowers with white petals and yellow centers bloom throughout summer. It grows readily in gardens, along walls and fences, and in disturbed ground. The leaves are slightly fuzzy and have a distinctly bitter taste that lingers on the tongue. People traditionally chew 1 to 2 fresh leaves daily for migraine prevention, a practice documented in British folk medicine that found its way into clinical trial protocols. Dried leaf capsules and tinctures are also common. The approach is preventive rather than acute. Feverfew is taken regularly to reduce migraine frequency, not as a rescue medication during an attack. The ancestors figured out the bioavailability problem through practice long before pharmacokinetics existed as a field. Why isn't this treated as a serious anti-inflammatory tool? Because it's a kitchen spice. It costs pennies per dose. It can't be patented. And a golden root from a tropical plant lacks the clinical gravitas of a white pill in a white bottle. But the NF-κB pathway doesn't care about packaging. It responds to molecular structure. And curcumin's structure is documented, validated, and quietly powerful. It's like having a master switch for inflammation sitting in your spice cabinet, and most people only reach for it when they're making curry. We've crossed 20 plants that span 3,000 years of documented use and 6 continents of traditional knowledge. But these last 2 aren't just powerful plants. They're the ones that prove the mission. That ancestral wisdom and modern science aren't rivals. They're the same intelligence, pointing at the same truth. Gotu kola, the brain vine, is Centella asiatica, and it is one of the most revered plants in the entire Ayurvedic pharmacopoeia. In Sanskrit, it's called Brahmi, linked to Brahma, the creator god. And it has been classified as a Medhya Rasayana, a rejuvenative for the mind, for at least 2,000 years. Ayurvedic physicians prescribed it for memory, concentration, wound healing, and longevity. Traditional Chinese medicine listed it among its top herbs. And across Southeast Asia, in Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and Malaysia, Gotu kola has been woven into daily life as both food and medicine for centuries. Now here's where modern neuroscience walks in. The key compounds are triterpenoids, specifically asiaticoside, madecassoside, asiatic acid, and madecassic acid. These compounds have been studied for their effects on nerve growth factor, collagen synthesis, and neuronal health. The wound healing side is equally compelling and better established. The plant is low-growing and creeping, with small kidney-shaped or fan-shaped leaves on slender stalks radiating from a central runner. It likes moist, shady spots, stream banks, marshes, and tropical forest floors. In warmer climates, it spreads easily and can be found growing wild in lawns and garden margins. The leaves are smooth and slightly waxy, with a mild, faintly bitter, herbaceous taste. When crushed, they release a subtle green, grassy scent. People eat gotu kola fresh in salads and juices across South and Southeast Asia, or take it as tea, tincture, or capsule. Traditional Ayurvedic preparation often combined it with ghee or honey to enhance absorption. Why is this one not in every nootropic stack and every wound care protocol? Because it's a humble, creeping ground cover from the tropics. It doesn't look impressive, it doesn't taste dramatic. And unlike caffeine or synthetic nootropics, it works gradually, building effects over weeks of consistent use. In a culture that demands immediate results, a plant that asks for patience gets overlooked. It's like having a long-term investment advisor for your brain and your skin, growing along a tropical stream bank, and nobody pays attention because it doesn't deliver overnight returns. One more, and this last one is the plant that shows you the full picture. The power, the risk, and the reason knowledge matters more than enthusiasm. Comfrey, the bone knitter, is Symphytum officinale, and its very name tells you what traditional healers expected it to do. The common name comfrey derives from the Latin confirma, to make firm, to knit together. Its folk names include knitbone and boneset, and those names weren't given lightly. For centuries across European herbalism, comfrey was the first choice plant for fractures, sprains, and deep tissue injuries. Poultices of comfrey root and leaf were applied to broken bones, torn ligaments, and bruised tissue with the expectation that healing would accelerate. Medieval monasteries grew it in their physic gardens. Elizabethan herbalists documented it extensively. And here's the compound that earns its reputation: allantoin. This molecule promotes cell proliferation, the rapid growth and division of cells that's critical for wound repair and tissue regeneration. Comfrey root is one of the richest natural sources of allantoin, and the plant also contains rosmarinic acid and mucilage that contribute anti-inflammatory and soothing properties. Modern clinical research has validated comfrey's topical use with impressive clarity. A randomized controlled trial published in Phytomedicine found that comfrey root extract cream significantly accelerated healing in acute ankle sprains compared to placebo. The plant itself is robust and dramatic. Large, rough, hairy leaves that can grow over a foot long, shaped like elongated ovals with a coarse, sandpaper-like texture. The stems are thick, and the plant stands 2 to 3 feet tall, with drooping clusters of bell-shaped flowers in purple, blue, pink, or cream. It smells green and slightly mucilaginous when the leaves are crushed. It grows vigorously in moist, rich soil, garden borders, riverbanks, and disturbed ground. And once established, it's nearly impossible to remove. People apply comfrey externally as poultices, infused oils, and salves for sprains, bruises, and muscle soreness. And this is where responsible knowledge becomes critical. Comfrey contains pyrrolizidine alkaloids, compounds that are hepatotoxic, meaning they can damage the liver when ingested. Internal use of comfrey is widely discouraged by modern herbalists and has been restricted by regulatory agencies in several countries. And that's exactly why this plant closes the list. Because the mission of this entire countdown was never about treating plants like magic pills. It was about reclaiming knowledge, real, layered, complex knowledge that includes both the power and the precautions. Comfrey is powerful. Comfrey is clinically validated. And comfrey requires you to understand what you're doing before you use it. Comfrey is the bone knitter, the tissue regenerator, the monastery garden cornerstone. It's also the reminder that reclaiming plant knowledge means taking it seriously, all of it, including the safety data. It's like inheriting a powerful tool from your grandparents and learning not just how to use it, but when to put it down. And that brings us back to where we started. Remember that ditch? The one on the side of a road somewhere, growing wild with dandelions and plantain and yarrow, surrounded by asphalt, overlooked by everyone driving past at 60 miles an hour? You see it differently now. You're not looking at weeds. You're looking at a respiratory support plant, a wound care plant, a hemostatic plant, and a mineral-dense tonic, growing together in a strip of forgotten soil that nobody maintains and nobody values. You're seeing what a Cherokee healer would have seen, what a Roman field medic would have recognized, what a modern pharmacognosist could verify with a compound analysis and a database search. 20 plants, thousands of years of documented use, hundreds of modern studies, compounds that inhibit the same pathways as pharmaceutical drugs, traditions that modern labs keep confirming, and nearly all of it growing within walking distance of where you sleep tonight, in vacant lots, along forest edges, in the cracks of sidewalks, in the margins of fields, in the garden beds you've been weeding without a second thought. The plants didn't disappear. They didn't lose their power. They didn't stop producing the compounds that civilizations relied on. What happened is simpler and sadder. The knowledge stopped being passed down. Convenience replaced competence. Bottles replaced botany. And a system that profits from scarcity convinced 3 generations that medicine only comes from factories. It doesn't. It never did. The pharmacy was always there. In the ditch, in the meadow, on the hillside, in the crack in the pavement. It's still there right now. The only thing that changed is you. You know the names now. You know the histories. You know the compounds. And the next time you walk past a patch of weeds, you'll see what you're really looking at. The pharmacy was never closed. You just didn't know the language. Now you do.